The morning air was cold on the outskirts of Cleveland when Margaret Collins lifted the metal door of her workshop. At 56 years old, she no longer rushed. Every movement carried the calm of someone who had learned that time reveals what impatience hides. The garage was modest, concrete floor stained by decades of work, walls lined with worn tools, and a quiet that spoke of discipline and care. Margaret had grown up in a blue-collar neighborhood near Toledo. Her father repaired delivery trucks. Her mother worked long shifts at a local diner. As a child, Margaret spent hours sitting nearby, watching engines come apart and come back together. Her father used to say that machines talk all the time, but most people are too busy to listen. She never forgot that. She did not have flashy diplomas on the wall, nor awards framed in glass. What she had was a reputation built quietly. When a vehicle had passed through every shop with no answers left, someone eventually mentioned her name. She took on the jobs others avoided, not out of pride, but out of curiosity and respect for the craft. That morning, her routine was broken. A flatbed truck pulled up in front of the shop, carrying something hidden beneath a thick cover. Even before it was uncovered, Margaret felt the weight of its presence. The driver double-checked the address and asked if this was really Collins Auto Repair. Margaret nodded. When the cover was removed, the contrast was striking. A rare luxury sports car sat inside a garage that had never known excess. The car had been transported from Detroit after being declared beyond repair. The engine shut down without warning, no clear explanation. Factory specialists had failed. Independent experts had stepped away. The verdict was unanimous. It was finished. Margaret did not react to its value or prestige. She walked slowly around it, ran her hand along the cold surface, and stood still for a long moment. Something felt wrong, but not in the way people described. The problem did not scream, it whispered. Later that day, the owner arrived. His name was Richard Hale, a well-known executive in the manufacturing industry. His posture was confident, but his eyes revealed exhaustion. He had already spent too much money and hope. He expected hesitation. Instead, Margaret asked one simple question. When did the first sign appear? The answer came tangled in explanations, failed fixes, and rushed decisions. Margaret listened without interruption. That was enough. She asked everyone to leave the garage. She said she needed silence. Richard hesitated, then agreed. Alone, Margaret opened the hood carefully, as if opening an old book. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, clean, aligned, untouched by doubt. That unsettled her more than a broken part ever could. She knew machines rarely fail suddenly. They carry small imbalances for a long time before giving up. As the light shifted through the high windows and the shop remained quiet, Margaret felt certain of one thing. This car was not dead because it lacked power. It was suffocating from excess. When she closed the shop that evening, the car remained still, but something had changed. For the first time in months, no one was trying to force it back to life. Someone was trying to understand it. Without realizing it, Margaret had accepted the most challenging case of her life. Margaret returned to the workshop before sunrise the next morning. The car waited in the same spot, silent and unmoving, yet somehow different. She did not turn on the radio or check her phone. She needed the quiet. She began working in areas others had avoided, not because they lacked skill, but because they feared going too far. As she worked, memories of her father came back. He used to say, "A healthy engine rarely demands attention. When something makes too much noise, the real warning has already been ignored." That belief guided her hands. Each part she removed was placed carefully in order, like chapters of a story that had to be read from the beginning. Richard returned later that day, alone. He stood quietly in the corner, watching. Margaret asked him not to speak. He agreed. For the first time in a long while, no one was rushing her toward an answer. Hours passed, then patterns began to emerge, faint marks, areas where heat had no business collecting. This was not a failure of strength, it was imbalance. The system had been fighting itself, slowly protecting its own survival. When Margaret spoke, she chose her words carefully. Every attempt to fix the car before had only shifted the problem somewhere else. Symptoms were treated, but the cause was ignored. Richard listened closely, his expression tightening. Accepting that truth meant accepting responsibility. On the third day, 2 engineers arrived, sent by Richard's company. They brought skepticism and urgency. They questioned her decisions, glanced at their watches, exchanged looks. Margaret did not argue. She kept working. Trust, she believed, could not be demanded. Late one afternoon, she called Richard over and pointed to a specific section. This was where it began. The silence that followed was heavy. That detail suggested the issue traced back to an early modification no one wanted to revisit. The mood in the garage shifted. This was no longer about a broken car. It was about admitting a mistake. Fixing it meant undoing decisions that had once been praised. Margaret wiped her hands and spoke plainly. There was still a solution, but it would not be quick and it would not be comfortable. The car could run again, but only if the truth was accepted first. Richard looked from the car to Margaret. In that moment, he understood he was not standing before a stubborn mechanic, but someone capable of changing the outcome entirely. Hope returned, but it came with fear, because now there was no way to pretend the problem did not exist. The days that followed were the hardest Margaret had faced in years. The workshop, once a place of quiet focus, felt heavy with tension. She arrived before daylight and left long after dark, her body sore and her mind restless. Every step forward revealed a new risk. The problem was clear, but the solution demanded a move few were willing to make. The engineers grew more insistent. They warned her about the danger, about liability, about reputation. They said no one had ever gone this far. Richard stood between them, torn. He trusted Margaret, but he also understood what failure would cost. Not just money, but credibility he had built over decades. One morning, Margaret uncovered something that stopped her cold. A previous adjustment made quickly to meet deadlines had worsened the imbalance. That single decision explained every breakdown that followed, but it also meant the system was far more fragile than anyone believed. One wrong move now could end everything. For the first time, Margaret sat down and did nothing. She stared at the oil-stained floor and considered walking away. She thought about her age, the years already spent working without recognition, the peace she could have if she simply said the job was impossible. No one would blame her. But she also remembered why she started. She remembered her father's quiet pride and his belief that unfinished work leaves a deeper wound than honest failure. That thought pushed her back to her feet. She changed her approach. She stopped trying to restore what had been and focused on what should be. Every adjustment was made slowly, deliberately. Time seemed to stretch. The only sound was the steady rhythm of her tools. When the first serious test began, everyone was present. The air was tight. Margaret asked for patience. She explained that balance cannot be rushed. The engineers shifted uneasily. To them, waiting felt like weakness. The engine responded, but a faint, irregular sound filled the room. One of the engineers stepped back immediately, convinced this proved the risk. Richard felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle in his chest. Margaret shut everything down. She closed her eyes for a moment. Something was still wrong, a detail so small it had nearly escaped her. Frustration replaced hope. The silence that followed felt heavier than noise. Richard finally asked if it was worth continuing. The emotional toll was clear. Margaret looked at him and spoke calmly but firmly. She said they were closer than ever, that stopping now would only repeat the mistake everyone else had made. That night, Margaret returned alone. She reviewed every step from the beginning. She adjusted, corrected, and measured again. Exhaustion made her hands shake, but not her resolve. The risk was absolute. If she failed, this story would end there. By dawn, the car was ready for one final attempt, covered, silent, waiting. Margaret turned off the lights and left without looking back. The next day would decide everything. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows when Margaret returned to the workshop. The air felt different. There was no tension, no urgency, no one trying to control the outcome. Richard arrived shortly after, alone. No engineers, no advisors, no phone calls. He had chosen to trust the process completely. Margaret removed the cover from the car with slow care. She sat in the driver's seat as if asking permission, resting her hands briefly on the wheel. She took a steady breath and turned the key. The first second passed in silence. Then the engine came alive, smooth and even, not loud, not aggressive, but steady. It sounded healthy. No one spoke. Margaret let the engine run briefly, listening closely, then turned it off. She stepped out and looked at Richard. She did not smile. She simply said that it was stable. Not perfect, stable. That distinction mattered more than celebration. The tests began quietly, first inside the shop, then on the empty street outside. The car moved effortlessly. No resistance, no hesitation. It felt balanced, as if a long-held tension had finally been released. Richard drove for several minutes before returning, his eyes filled with emotion he did not try to hide. It was not just relief, it was recognition. Over the following days, every test confirmed the same truth. The problem had never been solved because it was never understood. No dramatic replacement, no forced solution, just patience, honesty, and the courage to admit an old mistake. Word spread quickly. Offers came in, executive positions, partnerships, public recognition. Margaret declined them all. She chose to remain where she was, in the modest garage that allowed her to work without noise or pressure. When asked how she saw what others missed, she answered simply. She said she was not trying to prove she was right. She was trying to listen. She said machines, like people, fail when no one takes the time to understand them. The car left one quiet afternoon, no ceremony, no headlines. Margaret watched it disappear down the road and felt no emptiness, only closure. The job was finished. Her workshop continued to welcome what others abandoned, not because she performed miracles, but because she offered something rare: time, attention, respect. The story of that car endured, not because of its price or speed, but because of the lesson it carried, that experience outweighs haste, that listening matters more than force, that doing the right thing often happens quietly. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Many of us have faced moments when persistence was mistaken for stubbornness. And if you value stories about patience, dignity, and second chances, follow the channel. There is always more to uncover when we choose to look deeper.